How many of you have heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child? I like to kind of change that a little bit to it takes a family to raise a child, because what happens if that village becomes a government, and that government through its international relationships becomes part of a much larger government? And what will happen when those governments decide that they know how to raise your children better than you do, the parent? There's a brand new report out from the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Some of you know it as UNESCO. It's making waves across the world. And folks, it's raising some serious red flags. For anyone who values parental and educational freedom, I encourage you to watch this video. UNESCO recently published this report. It's called Homeschooling Through a Human Rights Lens. It sounds harmless, it even sounds academic. But inside this report, UNESCO outlines what a lot of critics are calling the most draconian attack on homeschooling in the history of the world. Now, I like to read these reports myself instead of just going by the headlines, because like you, I'm like, why do people always think the UN is so evil? And like you, I always can find the answers for it. But here's what the report actually says. UNESCO claims that governments have a quote-unquote duty to regulate homeschooling. Homeschooling is that private relationship that you have with your kids in your home, teaching them the academics that you feel they're going to need to succeed. They say that the state should make sure that every school, every homeschool, meets minimum standards of quality. Whose quality? Their quality? They believe that the government should decide what a proper education is, even in your own home. The report calls for things like mandatory registration of families who are using homeschooling. The government should know every single person who's educating their children in their own homes. It actually even goes as far as pushing for inspections and oversight, in some cases even in-home visits. And of course, it emphasizes regular evaluations to make sure that your kids are meeting the state requirements of education, what the state defines as a proper education, what they think your kids should be learning. Every day, more and more Americans are waking up to the fact that our society is simply unhealthy. We've been being fed poisons and being told to put poisons on our body by corporate America for years. A lot of the things that we've been told were bad for us, like animal fats, are actually good for our bodies. Your skin is the largest organ of your body, which is why on UNESCO Trading Co., we're pleased to offer you guys bison tallow lotions and creams. These bison tallow lotions and creams are amazing. They're not made by a big corporation. They're made by a homesteader, just like you guys, our friends out of Canada, Dr. Nathaniel and Susan Ostashowski. We've visited numerous bison ranches and farms and parks across the entire continent of North America. And these are some really great people who have come up with some really great products, and you can buy them on UNESCO Trading Co. and support this program and support your health all at the same time. You know, in reading this report, if you strip away the concept of human rights and equity, you're left with a very simple idea. Homeschooling only exists if the government controls it. Now, I homeschool my kids. There's no way I'm going to send my kids back to public school. They do much better at home, and statistics show that homeschoolers are far outperforming public schoolers in every single area of academics. Every state has its own regulations, and we have to follow those regulations. But what happens when a global world order that is quote-unquote making recommendations that everybody signs on to agree to starts taking that control over for themselves? That's where I think this is going more than anything. Remember, it doesn't take a village to raise a child, it takes a family to raise a child. Now, if you don't meet those requirements, the government's requirements or the UN's requirements for education, UNESCO argues that you as a parent could be held accountable for violating your child's rights to a quality education. Just let that sink in for a moment. You could be held accountable. I'm not saying that parents shouldn't be accountable for their children. I think that they should be. They should be solely accountable for the children and not the government. Because, I mean, let's be honest here. For most rural Americans and most people who utilize homeschooling systems, it isn't about rejecting education. It's about accepting responsibility for that education and choosing what their child learns and doesn't learn. What we're talking about here is somebody coming in and taking control of that process, telling you what is the right way to do it, what is the wrong way to do it, and what you have to include in your curriculum. And it's not just the state, it's not just the government. UNESCO wants this control. Homeschooling has deep roots in the United States. Faith, independence, practicality. Families do homeschooling because they care. They care about their children. Families do homeschooling because they believe that learning begins with the family, the parents, not the bureaucracy. But UNESCO sees that independence as a problem that has to be solved. They see it as a loophole that needs further regulation.